Jenny, you have a special interest in risk communication, and you also teach risk communication at university in Germany, am I right? So how is risk communication, how does it fit into the bigger science communication picture, and what is special about risk communication?
Well, I actually think that all science communication is risk communication, believe it or not.
Okay.
Although that's not exactly how I teach it. But I do, because science is all about uncertainty. And science progresses by scientists disagreeing with each other, and through there being a certain level of uncertainty, and other scientists then testing that uncertainty. So I think all science is about uncertainty, because no scientist will ever say they're 100% certain in anything.
That's very true. So
as science communicators, we're always talking about a level of uncertainty. However, this comes to the fore in particular when we're talking about science that affects people's lives, affects people's lifestyle, affects people's environment. So, for example, people are concerned about the quality of their drinking water is a very common example of risk communication. And so a scientist will come along and they will test it, and they will say, well, it's pretty safe. These things are at this level and it looks safe to drink. But people want to know how certain they are. They want to know whether it's absolutely safe to drink.
They want to know yes or no, basically.
Yeah, and they want to know what's causing any pollution and how certain they are that it's causing that pollution. Again, with, say they were siting a nuclear power station near a community, the community would want to know how safe that was, or how safe it, it was or wasn't. People are concerned about particularly the safety of their food, particularly if there have been preservatives added to it, if there have been agricultural sprays used on it, insecticides, other pesticides, if they're been genetically modified in any way. People are concerned about the risks of eating that food. And that's really where the whole of risk communication comes into. It's been very common in health communication, which is often about science as well. When people want to know about the risks of a certain disease, they want to know about the risks of vaccination of their children, and so on. And so it becomes quite a complex issue, particularly when you're talking about people's health, about people's lifestyle, and about the environment in which they live.
Okay. I have heard the phrase that they say our societies have become very risk averse. We absolutely want to know that everything is safe, and that we've maybe gone too far, and that sometimes communicating about risks can actually become a very hot topic, in the sense that if you communicate the risk of a certain disease in a certain country, it can really cripple the tourism industry in that country, for example, because people now avoid going there, and maybe the risk is very small. So I guess it's also a very, very big responsibility when you engage in risk communication of that kind.
Absolutely. It's when you're talking particularly about people's health, then people are very concerned about the risks. The trouble is that people are not necessarily rational in their perception of risk, which doesn't mean that their fears are wrong or invalid. I mean, we all care about having safe food. We all care about our children being safe and not being exposed to diseases unnecessarily. So we're all concerned about that, but we don't always have a rational perception of risk. And the way in which people's perception of risk is determined is quite often on things that aren't scientific. For example, we all know the risks of car accidents, very high in some countries, particularly a country like South Africa. But we all still choose to get in the car and drive it, or be a passenger in that car. Whereas if we were forced, for example, to go on a plane, we might think that was of higher risk because we don't have control over it. And food is a classic example. People are concerned about, genetically modified food, or food that has had preservatives added to it that they have no control over. They don't have control over whether there's GM food or whether they're preservatives. So they see them as more dangerous than their own storage and preparation of food. Right. However, scientifically, of course, the way in which you store and preserve, the way in which you personally store and prepare your food is a much higher risk to your health than any preservatives or GM manipulation that might have happened. But people are scared of that because they don't have control over it. So that sort of control or lack of control is one thing that guides risk. But there's a whole lot of other things as well, which are quite complex. And as science communicators, when we're communicating about risk, we need to understand the way in which people perceive risk. Because what might seem to be a rational way of explaining the risk, people will interpret in their own way, which makes them fearful or scared unnecessarily.
And another situation where science communicators are often called upon to respond, and often at very short notice, is when a crisis occurs, when there is an earthquake or a disaster or a very sudden outbreak of a disease. And so crisis communication obviously is also a kind of high-risk communication, I guess. Any advice on that?
Well, really, the same things that you do in terms of communicating about risk, which all comes down to how you plan risk, which is quite similar to a science communication plan, only you have to be even more careful about what people's perceptions are. You have to be even more careful about the messages you develop. If you're in an area of research where you could be asked where a crisis could happen, say you're an earthquake researcher, say you're involved in researching exotic diseases or whatever it is, then you should be prepared for those crises to happen, which means that you've already done your planning, you've thought about the messages you want to get across, you've thought about the people that might be interested and affected by this crisis and what they would want to know. You've probably allocated one spokesperson because you need that clear, consistent message. And most importantly of all, in a crisis, you have to be prepared to talk immediately, as quickly as possible, and be as honest as possible. And any look at crisis and communication that's happened where people have tried to hide things has ended in disaster. It has to be open, clear communication.
Thank you, Jenny.